Hello and welcome back to the next part in my series of videos on the Terramaster TOS NAS software. This is part 2. In our previous video, which I do recommend you watch before this one, we talked about initialization, setup, RAID configuration, volumes, user creation, shared files, mapped drives, and more. And today I'm going to talk about backup and synchronization. Arguably one of the biggest reasons most people buy a NAS. A lot of people are moving away from cloud providers because of security, subscription fees, and ultimately to have the data somewhere they can see it and hold it and cuddle it. One way or another, people like to have a lot of their backups in-house, still over the network and with remote access and a multi-tiered backup, but nevertheless not in cloud services. And although a lot of people buy NASs for things like Plex Media Server and applications like that for media and virtual machines and surveillance, backups are still pretty much king of the hill. And in the case of Terramaster, there are numerous different applications and services open to you on the platform that allow you to have not only a backup of your data, but multiple backups, synchronization, retention policies, fail-safes, safety nets, you name it. So, first and foremost, it's worth highlighting that a lot of you have a tendency to get a simple fact about NAS mixed up. You think, well, not all of you, just some of you, that when you create the storage pool of multiple drives and you put multiple drives together in a RAID configuration like this, where I've got 2 drives, WD UltraStars here in a RAID 1 environment, you take for granted, some of you, that RAID equals a backup. It does not. These are very, very different concepts. The reason being that a RAID configuration is about a safety net. It is that if one of these drives was to die, crack, fail, slow down, whatever, if something goes wrong with one of these drives, then the result is that your data is still accessible. The RAID would go into a degraded state, and until you introduce a brand new drive, then that data would still be accessible at a lower performance threshold. Once you do introduce a new drive, then it'll be absolutely fine. Now, RAID is useful, as mentioned, as a safety net, but it's not a backup strategy, because even though the data, say in the case of this RAID 1, has data that's the same on both drives, they only really exist within that RAID environment, and it's not really the same as having 2 copies of the same data on 2 different machines. That is why a lot of people, when they back up all of their mobile phones, tablets, computers and more onto the NAS, when they start to delete data from their iPhone or their new Acer laptop to make space, and they say to themselves, it's okay, I've got a backup on the NAS, they don't. They have the only copy of that data now on the NAS, and it's not a backup. And relying on RAID to protect you is not enough. And in today's video, I'm going to talk you through numerous methods of real and reliable backup. Some expensive, some cheap, some free. Okay? So another thing to touch on is the difference between backup and synchronization. Acer, QNAP, Synology, and of course Terramaster, all of these brands have multiple tools that can be broken down into tools of synchronization and tools of backup. If we have a look here at the backup section of the App Center on the Terramaster NAS, you can see numerous apps here that I think can be broken down really into 3 categories. Some of them are synchronization tools. They'll allow you to take 2 areas of storage, such as the NAS and say a cloud, and have both of those storage areas to have exactly the same data, and any updates on one is reflective on the other. That is synchronization. A backup, on the other hand, is when a copy of all of the data in one location, such as the NAS, is sent over to the second location, and changes are not in both directions. Also, these 2 areas are completely independent of one another and change. Therefore, if one was to die, your data is maintained. The third option is proprietary blob storage and object storage, something we're not really going to talk about much in today's video, although there are lots of different tools that are either linked directly to third-party platforms such as Mega and Box and stuff like that, whereas other ones are more open, such as AWS, and I'm not going to touch on them. I will refer to them at times. But for now, let's talk about one of the earliest and indeed low cost, and indeed by low cost I mean free, ways of adding in another layer of data recovery, again, much like RAID, so not really a backup, to your NAS, and that is snapshots. For those of you that aren't aware, snapshots are when areas of storage have kind of a blueprint made within the NAS system, and then the system utilizes much less space than a backup by doing this. It does this by taking, for example, let's take a very quick snapshot. Boom, we've just taken a snapshot, and now the system has created a kind of digital blueprint of that data that's in that folder. Over time, you can create lots of these, and then in the event you want to revert the data in your NAS to an older version, you're able to flick through those blueprints of your data into the past and go back to an earlier version. Once again, this is not a backup. If the NAS was to fail or your data, your hard drive RAID was to completely collapse, this is no good because you still need to have the base of the data that these snapshots are based on to exist, so you can go back through the timeline. Nonetheless, it is a low impact tool that is recommended particularly on BTRFS NASes. So let's create a snapshot schedule for this NAS. What you need to do is go into the settings area. From the settings area of the snapshots tool, click Enable Snapshot Schedule. Then select a schedule. In my case, I'm going to say every day. Every day, and let's say this is going to happen once a day. And it's going to be every single day. Once a day, every day. And again, I'm going to say that this system will hold 7 snapshots into the past. I can choose whether I want to always retain them, or do I want the system to, after 7 snapshots, overwrite the first one, and so on and so forth. For now, I'll say 7. Again, you can say whether you want these snapshots to be visible in the file management folder or invisible. I strongly recommend that you do not allow them to be visible, as it opens the door to accidental deletion. When you're done, click Confirm. And there you have it. Now this folder on the NAS, known as Public, has a schedule already enabled for its snapshot, and it's really that straightforward. Look at this one here. We can go ahead, create a brand new schedule, and again, we'll make this one every day. We'll make this snapshot happen with a little bit more regularity. We're going to do 30 snapshots to be kept, and those snapshots are going to be every 8 hours. And again, we click Confirm. And there you go. We have 2 snapshot schedules in place. If we want to revert to an old snapshot, when we go to the recovery option here, snapshots we've taken will appear. As you can see, that one that I clipped on before we did the schedule is now visible. So if we choose, we can click Recover. And then we can choose whether to recover that snapshot, clone it and create a duplicate, delete it, or lock it never to be deleted. And there you go. It's that straightforward for snapshots. But again, this is not a backup, this is not a synchronization, and although it's free and it utilizes much less space, it's still not perfect. So next, we'll click Confirm to leave, and we can look at our next option, an Rsync backup. We go into the backup tool here. Now, Rsync backups are a method of backing up the contents of your NAS onto another server, sometimes or more often via at least a case of Rsync on the local area network, say another NAS, although you're not completely restricted to it, and I'll talk about that a little later in the video. There's also the option of utilizing Time Machine, and if you are a Mac user, all you need to do is enable Time Machine on your Mac, and then you can search the local area network for this device to find it and add it as a time managed backup in Time Machine. But carrying on with Rsync, what we can do here is create our new Rsync backup with another server here on the local area network. It's going to be important that you get a note of the IP address. Go ahead and click Create. Give the task a name, so in this case I'm going to call it QTest. Then you have to give that IP. So as you can see, remove everything but the number starting with 3 digits and ending in either 1, 2 or 3 digits, just a block of 4 numbers. I would stick and keep the port number at the default 873 unless you manually changed it yourself. Then enter the login information for that NAS. Now do bear in mind, some NASes when you are activating an Rsync server, will require you to action that manually, as it can open ports on the NAS. So make sure on the other NAS that you plan on utilizing for an Rsync backup, go into those, and it will differ depending on the NAS, but find in the options menu within the NAS the Rsync settings, and then within there make sure you enable the Rsync server and either link it to the local NAS admin credentials or whatever user credentials you use, or create Rsync login details on that NAS that you can then add into this backup task. Now I've done it, let's click test. As you can see, it's found it, and next is now revealed. From here, we select which folder on the local Terramaster NAS we want to back up to the remote server. In this case, I'm going to use the public folder. Then select destination path, where the Terramaster has now indexed the folders on the other NAS. So in this case, I'm going to select home and then click next. Then say how often we want this to take place. I want this to take place each day, and I want it to happen at 1 AM. Click next. Then choose whether you want to activate encryption, although you will need to import the SSH settings of the other NAS. If you don't have that, you can activate it. Next, you can choose a compressed backup in order to reduce the amount of data being sent over the network. You can suspend all reading or writing operations during the backup. Ergo, you can stop the NAS performing any action that will add more data to the archive that you are backing up if you choose to. You can have it so the backup can only modify core structural data and not any of the inconsequential stuff, whether you want to back up everything or sparse the file backups, and that means keep them all separated. Click complete. And there you go. The backup for Rsync is now getting ready to run, and it's going to run at 1 AM. It's that straightforward. Also select the More option if you want to change the rules and what happens if a backup task fails and how you want the NAS to respond. It's that straightforward, and if you click the tick next to any of these, you can start them now, delete them, check the logs for how they've been running, and of course edit the settings on an existing backup task via Rsync. Always handy. Now, a number of you out there may find that that's a little bit more limited. There are other backup methods, of course, but why aren't they present here? Now, there is a beta tool currently available in the form of the Duple Backup. Duple Backup has some similar architecture and utility as the backup tool we just looked at, but with a few differences. As you see, I've already created a backup task there, but we can run another one here very easily. And this one can back up a shared folder on our NAS or an iSCSI LUN via a target if we've created one. Again, something we've talked about before. Click next, and then from there we can say whether we want the destination of this backup to be an Rsync server as before, but now we can also choose another folder on the NAS, another Terramaster NAS, or a WebDAV remote server. In other words, a server not on the network but via the internet. If we select a local shared folder, or if we choose to, a cloud drive, such as taking advantage of Google Drive, Dropbox and more, all of these options are ready and available here rather than utilizing the individual applications for each of them there. It's a much more efficient way of doing it. So for now, let's back up a local shared folder on the NAS and back it up to Google Drive. Then click next. There will be a pop-up asking us to give the Terramaster access to the Google Drive account. Here's the disposable Gmail that we've always been using for our videos, so we can go ahead and proceed. You can choose whether you want it to be able to edit any of those files or only be able to see them. Whatever you choose is up to you. Click continue. And then from there, confirm that it can have access to that account. So as you can see, we're now going to be backing up a folder from our NAS, which in this case, let's go from perhaps the public folder, and we're going to back this folder up to the cloud. now that the folders have appeared, we can choose a folder from our cloud, in this case the Google Drive. I'm going to select a fairly empty and innocuous folder so we can limit network traffic and not affect anything later on in this video. So if we go with Q Files here and then click Confirm, we can now see that this is the destination for our backup. And from here, we can start carrying on with creating our new task. We've created a directory for our backup task. We click Next. And then from there, we can start finalizing and changing some of the rules of the backup between this NAS and Google Drive. Now we need to select the source folder. This is the folder that resides on the NAS. I'm going to select the public folder again and then click Confirm. This is the folder on the NAS that we're going to back up regularly onto the cloud. We give this task a name. We're going to call this one tback. Click Next. Then we have to select how and when we want it to happen. Do we want a notification that the job is completed? Do we want to compress the data to make this an easier task? When do we want this to run? And again, I'm going to do this every day at 1 AM. Then we decide whether we want incremental or multi-version backups. What that means is, incremental means after the first initial large backup, it will only back up the changed files moving forward. This means that if you are backing up a large database, although the first backup is very, very large, every day after that, it will be much smaller, as it will only back up the changed files. Multi-version means that files will be kept over time, whether they be time managed or individual files and folders with a backup in a different directory every time. I'm going to go with incremental. Then we just need to confirm everything we've done so far, and it will create this task, which, much like our other tasks, if we choose to, we can edit the rules, as well as change a number of the settings and what happens if things go wrong. And again, all of this all within the single Duple Backup tool. Now, as mentioned, we could go directly into Google Drive Sync if we choose and synchronize the Google Drive. Now, you might think that's exactly the same thing that we've just done, but it isn't. The Google Drive Sync, much like synchronization compared with backup, is when we are going to add that directory that we've just created, but this time, rather than targeting it as a backup destination, this time we're going to be connecting this area of storage to be visible within the NAS and synchronize it onto a local folder. So with Google Drive, and again, there are applications for Dropbox, for Elephant Drive and more. We give it a name. We'll call it Task 11. We select the local folder here on the NAS. We'll go with public. We then select the cloud directory that we want to synchronize with Google Drive. So in this case, we'll go for Acer Store Sync this time, just for the hell of it. We then choose whether we want it bi-directional, so any change in one folder either side is always synchronized. Download cloud changes only means that only changes on the cloud will be recognized and sent over. And upload changes mean only the changes on the local NAS folder will be sent over to the cloud. I'm going to go with bi-directional. Again, we can say how often do we want it to happen? Do we want it to be a constant synchronization or resynchronization every period of time? And I'm going to say every 100 minutes, although you can set it as low as 0 minutes or seconds. And also you can limit the speed of that synchronization if you're worried about how much of the system or network resources it consumes. Then click Next and confirm. So now, not only have we got a backup task onto our Google Drive account and a NAS to NAS backup over the network, but now we've got a synchronized folder here on the NAS, which allows us to not only now access the likes of the NAS internally, but we can now access a lot of the data on third-party clouds if we connect them, with lots of that synchronization happening in the background, and as soon as it's set up for the first time, you never have to worry about it again. There's two last main backup tools to talk about, but before I talk about them, it is worth just quickly highlighting one last tool, Duple Backup. This is one that we're not going to go into any detail on this video before we talk about two mainline tasks. Duple Backup is a tool to be utilized by those of you that use Google G Suite or Google Workspace as it's now known, and it allows you to synchronize the Google Mail, Google account, Google Drive, and all of those Google services to the NAS, and therefore you can access them through the NAS, and therefore if you lose internet connectivity, you'll still be able to access all of those Google Workspace features, and then later on when internet connection is re-established, it will then make any of the changes that you've made in the meantime between the NAS and the cloud without your intervention. I'm not going to set it up today because it's a lot more enterprisey, but I will be looking at this in a bigger subject and comparing it against how other NASs have handled Google Workspace and Office 365 in a future video. But it is a very enterprise-grade synchronization tool for SaaS services, known as Software as a Service platforms. But for now, let's take a look at those last two services. The first one is USB copy. For those that aren't aware, a lot of NAS systems have got USB ports on them that allow you to connect USB drives, and these USB drives can then have either the contents of the entire NAS or bits of the NAS at your choice backed up onto a USB periodically that you can take with you, or a USB that you can periodically connect to the NAS and they get backed up. There's lots of different ways around that, so let's go ahead and create our USB backup. Let's give it a name, and we're going to call this one TUSB. We can choose whether we want to back up from the NAS onto the USB or the USB onto the NAS. Let's go ahead with USB onto the NAS. First, we select the source, which in this case is on the USB drive, and I'm going to select a folder, like so. Let's go for something nice and straightforward. Let's go for this Patriot Viper video folder here. From there, select the destination on the NAS. I'm going to select the public folder, which has already got a lot of backup routines we've set up. Click Next. Then say whether you want multi-versions, which is whether you want time-managed versions with a folder each time being created, a mirrored version, where the content of the USB folder is always identical to that of the NAS, or incremental as mentioned, where there's one initial large backup and then periodic small ones afterwards for the files that are added or changed. I'm going to go with multi-version. If we click Next, we can choose whether we want the backup now, do we want the backup on a schedule, or to not back up at all and just do it manually when we choose. More interesting that we can have it so that this backup happens as soon as the USB is connected. The system will check that it's the same USB and folder structure before it actions the backup. But I'm going to go for a scheduled backup. Let's say every day, but actually no, let's go for a backup now. And there you go, click confirm. And now there's a backup taking place right now between the USB drive and the Terramaster NAS. And also with this, you can change some of the rulings and also edit a lot of those settings that you created later on. You can even check the logs to see when USB tasks are successful and unsuccessful. Lots of straightforward stuff there. Now the final thing I'm going to talk about is, although it is available on Terramaster, it is their localized client tool, and arguably, although I've tried my best in these videos to never talk about third-party client applications, in the case of Terramaster, they currently don't have a Windows or Mac desktop client synchronization tool. By that I mean a tool that on your local PC, such as here, where there is a folder on your NAS that is targeted to the brand, where when you go in, there's synchronized folders that live on the NAS, but which are accessible and visible on your local PC, which you can then right click and scroll down if you choose and create a share link on your desktop, or access the file history, or delete them to make space on a local computer, but still have them on the NAS. In order to have this service, Terramaster have partnered with Aomi. Aomi Backupper is a local synchronization tool for your desktop Windows system. You download it here and install it on your PC. Although it's worth highlighting that as it's a third-party tool, it doesn't really focus much on specifically targeting the Terramaster platform. It also has paid upgrades which you may or may not like. But if you do want to take advantage of this software, it's quite straightforward. you'll be presented with this screen, and you can create a new synchronization tool or backup tool depending on your overall user need. If you want to back up preset folders on your PC regularly, select this option. But if there's numerous users on different computers that all need to work with a shared drive where all of the changes made by all individual users need to be seen and reflected on everyone else's shared folder, select a synchronization. In the case of a new backup, we next select what we're going to do, whether we're going to utilize a system backup, whether we're going to be utilizing whole system or individual files and folders, and then select them accordingly. So in my case, I'll select a file backup. We then add a folder either from our local PC or the NAS. So let's go with my local PC and look at the library, and we'll select my camera roll file. Then we can select the next one. This is going to be the destination, which in this case is going to be the NAS. We have to add a network location. So again, we'll need to add the location of the NAS on the local area network. So we add the IP, which as you can see there at the top of the screen is 192.168.1.119. And we can choose whether that's anonymous or has the login information, which of course we're going to need. Click OK. And if there's a problem logging in, there's a very good chance that either the password is wrong or the display name has not been correctly configured. As mentioned, you will need the login information, so the display name available here. I'm not going to go much further in this tool because it is a third-party tool and not one from Terramaster. I know Terramaster are constantly innovating on their platform, and I'd like to hope that they're going to produce their own tool soon. And although I could walk you through Iomi tool, I know there are many guides online that will show you this a great deal better than this Terramaster focused video. Nonetheless, this has been the range of backup and synchronization tools available to you on the Terramaster platform. As mentioned, there are several other options available in the Application Center, which center a lot more on third-party platforms and third-party tools. Alternatively, you do have the centralized backup tool for those of you that are going to be using more enterprise level servers or taking advantage of virtual machines that you need to back up the files from remotely onto your Terramaster NAS, and these are ones that I will touch on a far more enterprise video later down the line. But for now, let's wrap things up on today's backup and synchronization guide on Terramaster TOS. In our next video for Terramaster, we're going to be looking at multimedia. We're going to be looking at how to set up your perfect multimedia NAS here on the Terramaster TOS platform. If you've enjoyed this video, click like. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and makes every video better than the last. And of course, click subscribe and the bell to be notified as new parts in this series and indeed new and exciting videos in the world of data storage become available. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Take advantage of the free advice section, the NAS Compares free advice section linked in the description below. And other than that, I will see you on the next video.